January 3rd, 1945, Versailles, France. The conference chamber inside SHAF headquarters felt charged, heavy with strain. Beyond the windows, an unforgiving winter gale swept across palace grounds once ruled by French monarchs. Within those walls, the leaders of the Western Alliance stood dangerously close to open rupture. Charles de Gaulle, head of Free France, sat opposite Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander. Winston Churchill had arrived from London, risking treacherous winter skies. The British Prime Minister knew this gathering might decide the survival of the alliance itself. The reason for the emergency session centered on one place: Strasbourg. 2 days earlier, more than 100,000 German troops had slammed into American positions in Alsace. The blow shocked Allied command. They were still locked in combat during the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes. Now Hitler had ignited a second offensive, and Eisenhower had issued an order that threatened to shatter unity. General Jacob Devers had been instructed to abandon Strasbourg. The entire 6th Army Group was to fall back behind the Vosges Mountains, surrendering territory American and French soldiers had bled to seize only 6 weeks before. De Gaulle erupted in anger. Strasbourg was far more than a city. It was a symbol. The capital of Alsace-Lorraine, land contested between France and Germany for 1,000 years. In 1871, Germany captured it after the Franco-Prussian War. In 1919, France reclaimed it following the First World War. In 1940, the Nazis seized it once again. General Philippe Leclerc's 2nd Armored Division liberated Strasbourg on November 23rd. French soldiers wept openly in the streets. The tricolor rose above the cathedral for the first time since 1940. Years earlier, in the African desert, Leclerc had sworn he would not rest until French colors flew over Strasbourg Cathedral. That promise had been fulfilled just 6 weeks earlier. Now Eisenhower proposed handing it back to the Nazis. De Gaulle stated his stance without hesitation. If American forces withdrew, French troops would defend Strasbourg alone. He would remove his entire army from Allied command. The Western Alliance would splinter at the worst possible moment. Churchill grasped what Eisenhower did not. This crisis was not about battlefield logic. It was about 400,000 French civilians who would face brutal reprisals for celebrating liberation. It was about the soul of a nation. After hours of fierce debate, Eisenhower yielded. Strasbourg would be held. French forces would assume responsibility for the city. American units would maintain the defensive line. Yet none of it would have mattered if no line existed to defend. Because while Eisenhower hesitated, while de Gaulle issued threats, while Churchill negotiated, one American general had already chosen not to retreat. He had positioned his forces to fight. He had already defied orders from his own supreme commander. His name was Jacob Devers, and he alone was prepared for Operation Nordwind. December 16, 1944. On the same day German forces launched their massive assault in the Ardennes, Jacob Devers stood at his headquarters in Vittel, France, commanding the 6th Army Group. His command consisted of 2 armies: General Alexander Patch's United States 7th Army and General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny's French 1st Army. Together, they held the southern anchor of the Allied front, stretching from the Vosges Mountains to the Swiss border. Devers had been fighting since August. His 6th Army Group had landed in southern France during Operation Dragoon and surged 450 miles north in 30 days. They liberated Marseille, Lyon, and Strasbourg. By November, Devers stood along the Rhine River. He was the first Allied commander to reach it. He wanted to cross. A crossing site near Rastatt, north of Strasbourg, had already been selected. German defenses on the opposite bank were thin. Intelligence officers reported that a swift thrust could establish a bridgehead before German forces could respond. Devers believed the move could collapse the entire German southern front, possibly ending the war months earlier. On November 24th, Eisenhower visited Devers' headquarters. Devers presented his proposal: cross the Rhine immediately while German forces remained disorganized. Exploit the moment before it vanished. Eisenhower refused. The Supreme Commander insisted all Allied forces reach the Rhine together, a broad front strategy. no single army group surging ahead. Devers was ordered instead to clear the west bank of the Rhine and eliminate the Colmar Pocket, a German bridgehead south of Strasbourg still occupying French soil. Devers was incensed. He believed Eisenhower had discarded a historic opportunity, but he was a soldier. He obeyed. What he could not foresee was how severely that obedience would soon be tested. When the German Ardennes offensive struck on December 16th, Allied command descended into crisis. Eisenhower stripped divisions from every sector to reinforce the Bulge. Patton's Third Army pivoted north toward Bastogne. Devers was ordered to extend his already thin defenses to cover Patton's abandoned ground. Suddenly, the 7th Army was responsible for 126 miles of front. 6 infantry divisions and 2 armored divisions were spread across terrain that should have required 12 divisions to defend. Some units held sectors 20 miles wide. Doctrine dictated that a division should hold no more than 5 miles. Devers understood the implication. If German forces struck while his line remained exposed, disaster would follow. On December 19th, Eisenhower summoned his commanders to Verdun, the same meeting where Patton famously pledged to relieve Bastogne within 48 hours. Afterward, Eisenhower pulled Devers aside. New intelligence had arrived. German forces were concentrating opposite the 7th Army. Another offensive was imminent. Eisenhower offered a solution: retreat, withdraw from vulnerable positions in Alsace, shorten the front, abandon ground to create reserves, prepare to fall back as far as the Vosges Mountains if necessary. Devers argued forcefully against it. His men had paid dearly for that terrain. A withdrawal would crush morale. Abandoning Strasbourg would be a political catastrophe for France. Eisenhower was unmoved. He issued a direct order: prepare contingency plans for withdrawal. Be ready to execute them on short notice. Devers returned by air to his headquarters. He summoned Patch and his senior commanders. He briefed them on the threat. He relayed Eisenhower's orders. Then, he made a remarkable decision. He chose to fight. December 24th, 1944, Christmas Eve. While American troops froze inside foxholes across the Ardennes, a warning reached Devers' headquarters. His intelligence officers reported a sharp surge in German radio transmissions opposite the 7th Army. Captured prisoners spoke of fresh formations arriving. German patrols grew bolder and more frequent. An attack was imminent. Devers was not surprised. He had already been preparing. Unlike commanders who depended solely on filtered intelligence from above, Devers built his own system. His G2 staff tracked German movements for weeks. They identified no fewer than 17 German divisions assembling for an assault. Among them were the 6th SS Mountain Division, the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, the 21st Panzer Division, and the 25th Panzergrenadier Division. This was not a limited strike. It was a full-scale offensive. On December 26th, a message arrived from SHAF. The attack would begin within days. Allied codebreakers had intercepted German signals confirming the operation, but here lay the difference between Devers and others. He did not wait for authorization. He did not request clarification. He moved. Devers ordered Patch to reposition his most exposed units onto defensible ground. Not a full withdrawal to the Vosges as Eisenhower demanded, but to intermediate positions that could be held. He designated the Moder River as the backbone of his defense. Units were stripped from quiet sectors and reassigned as mobile reserves. Newly arriving formations, the 42nd, 63rd, and 70th Infantry Divisions, were instructed to send their infantry regiments forward immediately. They would not wait for full division assembly. These regiments were grouped into improvised task forces under assistant division commanders. On paper, the reserves did not exist. In reality, Devers had created them. Most critical of all, Devers refused to surrender Strasbourg. He shifted responsibility for the city to the French First Army. Strasbourg remained under Allied control while American formations redeployed to meet the German blow. It was a calculated risk. Technically, Devers complied with Eisenhower's order to prepare for withdrawal. In practice, he positioned his forces to stand and fight. If the gamble failed, his career would end. If it succeeded, the Southern Front would survive. New Year's Eve, 1944, 11 p.m. Across frozen foxholes in Alsace, American soldiers waited. There would be no celebrations. General Patch had forbidden them. He did not want enemy attacks met by exhausted, distracted men. At midnight, the waiting ended. German artillery erupted along an 80-mile front. Thousands of shells slammed into American positions. Nebelwerfer rocket launchers, the infamous screaming Mimis, ignited the night sky. Then came the infantry. Then came the armor. Operation Nordwind was underway. 3 days earlier, at his headquarters at Adlerhorst, Hitler addressed his commanders. "This attack has a very clear objective," he declared, namely the destruction of enemy forces. "It is not about prestige, it is about destroying and exterminating the enemy wherever we encounter them." Two German army groups advanced simultaneously. Army Group G under General Oberst Johannes Blaskowitz attacked from the north through the lower Vosges. Army Group Oberrhein, commanded by Heinrich Himmler himself, struck from the Colmar pocket in the south. Himmler had no battlefield experience. He had overseen camps, not combat units. But Hitler trusted him, and Hitler promised him a reward. By January 30th, the swastika would fly over Strasbourg Cathedral. The aim was not merely territorial recovery. The objective was total destruction of the American 7th Army. A follow-on operation, codenamed Zahnarzt, would then strike Patton's 3rd Army from the rear. If successful, the Allied southern flank would collapse entirely. The opening blow struck Task Force Hütteln. It was a hastily assembled force of cavalry squadrons and armored infantry holding the seam between 15th Corps and 6th Corps. German units infiltrated through fog and dense forests without preliminary artillery fire. By dawn, they had penetrated 10 miles into American lines. At Vingen-Surer, the 6th SS Mountain Division, veterans of brutal fighting in Finland and Russia, smashed into the 45th Infantry Division. In savage, close combat, SS troops annihilated an entire battalion of the 157th Infantry Regiment. The town changed hands repeatedly. At Bitcher, 4 Volksgrenadier divisions pushed through mountainous terrain, threatening the vital road leading to Strasbourg. By January 5th, the German assault had carved dangerous salients across the American front, yet it had not achieved a breakthrough. Now, Devers' preparations proved decisive. Mobile reserves rushed to seal gaps as soon as they appeared. At Vingen, the 45th Division bent but did not collapse. Task forces formed from newly arrived divisions raced toward threatened sectors. American artillery, pre-positioned on commanding heights, pummeled German columns funneling along mountain roads. The Germans expected the 7th Army to disintegrate. They calculated it would take at least a week for an effective response. Instead, they encountered immediate resistance. January 7, 1945. German command committed its exploitation force. The 21st Panzer Division and 25th Panzer Grenadier Division, held in reserve for a breakthrough that never occurred, were thrown into battle regardless. They advanced south from Wissenberg toward Hatten and Rittershofen. What followed became one of the most brutal fights on the Western Front. For 2 weeks, combat unfolded street by street, house by house, sometimes room by room. Tanks dueled at point-blank range. German flamethrower tanks incinerated bunkers with Americans still inside. American tank destroyers hunted Panthers through debris-choked streets. The 79th Infantry Division, veterans of Utah Beach, held Rittershofen. The 14th Armored Division fought at Hatten. By daylight, Americans controlled one end of each village. By nightfall, Germans held the other. Front lines cut through kitchens and cellars. Colonel Hans von Luck, commanding a regiment of the 21st Panzer Division, later wrote that Rittershofen was among the most costly battles of his career. And von Luck had fought at El Alamein. He had fought at Kursk. He had fought in Normandy. Beneath the battle, 1,500 French civilians sheltered in cellars, praying in darkness. When the fighting finally ceased, 90% of both villages lay in ruins. The wreckage of 31 American Shermans, 9 Stuart light tanks, and 51 German tanks and assault guns littered streets and fields. 83 civilians died in Hatten alone. But the German advance had failed. January 15, 1945. The situation had reached a breaking point. The United States 6th Army Group now faced attacks from 3 directions. German units had established a Rhine bridgehead at Gamsheim, only 10 miles from Strasbourg. Another force advanced through the Hagenau forest. Inside SHAF headquarters, Eisenhower was gripped by fear. He watched his worst scenario unfold. The 7th Army faced encirclement. If it collapsed, the 3rd Army's flank would be exposed. The entire Allied posture in Western Europe could unravel. Eisenhower sent another directive to Devers: withdraw immediately, fall back behind the Vosges Mountains, abandon everything. Once again, Devers refused. He understood what Eisenhower could not see. His men were holding. German attacks were losing momentum, and with each passing day, reinforcements streamed in from the Ardennes, where the Bulge was finally breaking. Devers adjusted his deployment once more. He pulled the battered 79th Infantry Division and 14th Armored Division out of Hatton and Rittershofen. They were withdrawn to the Moder River. This was not the retreat Eisenhower demanded. It was a controlled repositioning that shortened the line while preserving defensive strength. The Moder River became the final barrier. Eisenhower, still pressing for total withdrawal, grew enraged. He accused Devers of insubordination. He threatened removal from command. General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's chief of staff, contacted Devers directly. The message was scathing. The Supreme Commander believed Devers was deliberately ignoring orders. Devers stood firm. He trusted his judgment, he trusted his soldiers, and he trusted Alexander Patch, who was conducting one of the war's great defensive actions with almost no acclaim. January 25, 1945. The 22nd Infantry Regiment, part of the 42nd Infantry Division, halted the final German assault at Hagenau. For their stand, they earned the Presidential Unit Citation. That same day, long-awaited reinforcements arrived from the Ardennes. The 101st Airborne Division, fresh from Bastogne, took up positions along the Moder River. Hitler personally ordered Operation Nordwind terminated. His final western offensive had failed. Strasbourg remained under Allied control. The 7th Army survived intact. The 3rd Army's flank remained secure. The Western Alliance endured. The cost was immense. American casualties reached approximately 15,000, including 3,000 killed. German losses exceeded 23,000. During Nordwind, the 6th SS Corps alone suffered 14,716 casualties. Without Devers' decisions, the toll would have been catastrophic. Had Eisenhower's withdrawal been executed, Strasbourg would have fallen. The Germans would have seized the Severn Road junction. They would have positioned forces to strike Patton's rear. The Allied southern front might have collapsed entirely. 400,000 French civilians would have faced Nazi reprisals for welcoming liberation. German radio had already proclaimed the swastika's return to Strasbourg Cathedral. Instead, French troops held the city. American forces held the Moder. The German offensive failed to meet a single strategic objective. Within weeks, the Allies resumed their advance. In February, the Colmar Pocket was eliminated. In March, Operation Undertone cleared northeastern Alsace. On March 26th, Devers' 6th Army Group crossed the Rhine. On May 5, 1945, General Jacob Devers accepted the unconditional surrender of Army Group G, all German forces in southern Germany and Austria. History, however, treated Operation Nordwind differently. In official narratives, it became a footnote to the Battle of the Bulge. The Ardennes received endless attention. Patton's relief of Bastogne became legend. Nordwind was barely acknowledged. Devers received little credit. In post-war evaluations, Eisenhower ranked him 24th out of 38 generals, describing him as energetic but inaccurate. He rated Omar Bradley higher, despite Bradley being caught completely off guard by the Ardennes offensive. Courtney Hodges also ranked above Devers, though Hodges nearly collapsed during the Bulge. The friction between Eisenhower and Devers stretched back years. In 1943, Devers refused to release bombers in North Africa. In 1944, he refused to release Lucian Truscott to serve under Bradley. Eisenhower never forgave these slights. George Marshall did. The Army Chief of Staff recognized what Devers had achieved. On March 8, 1945, Marshall pushed through Devers' promotion to full general. It made him the second highest-ranking American officer in Europe, behind only Eisenhower. The promotion date placed him ahead of both Bradley and Patton in seniority. Marshall understood what history would eventually acknowledge. When retreat was ordered, Devers prepared to fight. When de Gaulle panicked, Devers remained composed. Where others saw weakness, Devers uncovered strength. Historians are now reassessing his role. The National World War II Museum cites Operation Nordwind as proof that Devers was among the war's most capable field commanders. Analysts note his skill in shifting forces under pressure while navigating the political tension between Eisenhower and de Gaulle. The most revealing judgment came from Devers himself. After the war, he recorded his thoughts about Eisenhower's withdrawal orders in his diary. "You can kill a willing horse by demanding too much. SHAF assigned me excessive front and stripped away too many troops. This is unsound." He was correct, but he did not hide behind the flaw. He adapted and prevailed. The 6th Corps commander, General Edward Brooks, fought what Devers called one of history's greatest defensive battles with limited means. The 79th Infantry Division held Rittershofen until ordered back. The 42nd Infantry Division stopped the final assault at Hagenau. The 45th Infantry Division shattered the 6th SS Mountain Division at Vingen. They held because Devers placed them correctly. They fought because he refused retreat. Operation Nordwind left enduring lessons. Intelligence matters only when acted upon. Preparation succeeds only when leaders trust their troops. Orders from above are not always right. Sometimes commanders at the front see what distant headquarters cannot. Devers saw an army capable of holding. Eisenhower, studying maps in Paris, saw disaster. Both perspectives have value, but in January 1945, in the frozen forests of Alsace, the correct choice was to fight. That is why Devers was the only general ready for Operation Nordwind. Not because of luck, not because of recklessness, but because when every instinct urged retreat, he trusted his soldiers to stand. When obedience was the easier path, he chose resistance. And in war, judgment like that decides everything. They fought because Devers refused to let them run. They held, they endured, they transformed desperation into victory. Nordwind proved that leadership, courage, and resolve can alter history, even against overwhelming odds. Devers demonstrated that one determined general, armed with discipline and tactical brilliance, could defy orders when required and save hundreds of thousands of lives. As we remember the sacrifices made at Strasbourg and across Alsace, we honor not only those who fought, but those who chose courage over compliance. History remembers those who stand firm when others falter. If you want to explore more untold stories that shaped the modern world, subscribe now and uncover the battles history nearly forgot.